panel will be led by Jacqueline Wilson-Smith. Jackie is the CEO of the Sustainable Innovation Company and also an independent board director, chair and founder of various agri-food and member-based organisations. She will be joined by an expert-led panel session, including our keynote, Barry Irvin, the Honourable Niall Blair, Associate Professor Carol Richards from the University of Technology, and Ben van Delden from KPMG. As the panellists make their way to the stage and are sitting down, just a reminder that you can engage in the conversation via slido.com using that code word DAS22, so DAS22. So make sure you get on there and ask plenty of questions. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. Hello, Barry, as well, joining us there. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where we meet. We are here on the land of the Wiradjuri people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to thank them for the pristine preservation of the lands for thousands of years. A very warm welcome to our circular economy panel today. And I just want to ground ourselves just for a moment. Think about some of the things that Barry talked about, the pressing challenges on us, whether it's climate change, droughts, fires, floods, all of the issues that are facing us. And this is an opportunity today to talk about how together, by creating these circles of trust and shared understanding, we can really make a difference. So I'm Jackie Wilson-Smith. I'm going to be wearing very proudly my food agility hat today, and I'm here to do my very best to encourage some meaningful conversations about circularity and to bring, obviously, our panellists their stories and their ideas on how we can work together better, but also to invite you all as the audience, whether you're in the room with us physically today or whether you're joining us online, to participate in the conversation and to use the Slido application. I've got that here so that I can see your questions coming through, and the passcode is DAS22. So please jump on and start asking some questions. So I will be facilitating this loosely, but I would like us to just take a little bit of a pathway so that we can firstly think about why, going right back to what David Lamb had said yesterday, thinking about why does circularity matter to in the context particularly of agri-food industries, systems and ag tech and the role of digitisation. So that's sort of the first area. And then we'll go on to perhaps thinking about some of the challenges and what are the barriers for adoption, particularly in the context of our Australian industries, what's holding us back. And Barry, you shared lots of ideas there, so we'd love to be tapping into and unpacking that a little bit more. And if we can have some controversy around that, that would be great. So again, from the audience, we want to hear your questions, but we'd also love to canvass your ideas as well about what's holding us back. And then finally, we'll be landing on that sunny space of where are the opportunities for us to truly work together in trusted, safe environments to really make a difference. So on that, let's jump in, and the first part is I'm going to be sharing the questions around here, and I think we might start with you, Ben, on that why piece. And actually, before we do, though, I just wanted to recap on what is circularity, because Barry gave us a great definition, and I love to simplify things even more, and I like to think about it in just 3 ways as a definition. So firstly, there's the out, so it's that designing out waste, pollution, everything that we don't need to have in our systems, so that's the out. The second part, which is one of the principles, is what's in. So if we think about our non-renewable materials, how can we keep them in circularity for longer? So that's sometimes the opposite from designing things for short-term use. It's designing it for longer. And then the third principle is about natural systems, those regenerative natural systems, and how can we ensure that they are truly sustainable. So there were the principles. So let's jump into now the why. And so Ben, I'd love to hear from your point of view at a personal level. You know, why does circularity matter? And perhaps with your experience too, if you can take us down a path of the economy part too.
Yeah,
thanks, Ben.
Great. Well, actually, on a personal level, it really struck a chord for me when my eldest daughter, Gabriella, came home and said, "Dad, I've got to do a school project. And, you know, you've been an auditor for a really long time and that sounded really boring, but you've been doing this really interesting stuff with Barry and the team and Bega, and I'm really curious about, you know, how we as students can play a different role in changing the way the world works, because we're, you know, going along and protesting about the impact of climate, and it's really concerning for us, and I want to do this study, and Barry and Faith generously helped Gabriella out to discover what Cyril Percy Callister did, as Barry said, in coming back from World War I on his way back through the US and discovering the fine arts, taking brewer's yeast and turning it into Vegemite. And for me, that was a real sense of connection, because I knew I wasn't going to inspire her to be an auditor, but to inspire her to want to actually go out and make a change and look at ways of being more resourceful with the resources we have is important. So I think in terms of why is this important to everybody in this room and everybody online, you cannot get to net zero without going circular. Renewable energies will get us 55% of the way, and so the other 45% requires us to be transformational in how we work with resources. So everyone here has to eventually get with the circularity. So that's why it's so important, I think, to me and to all of us, Jackie. And I think one other comment I'd make is it's about keeping resources circulating in our economy for as long as possible, so we get the maximum value out of it. Because if we're extracting a resource, we owe it to the planet, which we're consuming at twice the rate we should, to make the fullest use of it. So it's that simple. It's about just making sure that resource goes around as often as we possibly can before we go and take another one.
Thanks, Ben. I think it's a great point just to be really iterating that it's keeping those resources, particularly the ones that are not renewable, circulating. So thank you. Niall, from your point of view, what's your why, personal as well as from a business point of view? And love to touch on policy as well.
Yeah, for me, there are probably a number of whys that through work and personal experiences led me to, I guess, where I am in circular economy. It started with waste. So probably the two biggest fronts were, if you want a challenge, be a water minister during a drought and see some of the debate that came around the use of natural resources, and then have a good look at the amount of water that is used to produce food that's wasted. And to me, it was a pretty challenging thing to be, one, standing on a river with 3 million fish rotting in front of you and listening to the debates around water, but then when you get a true understanding of the amount of water that is actually used to then produce good quality food that ends up in landfill giving off emissions, you start to think, I think the debate is a little bit skewed. And I think the penny really dropped for me was when I was back home. My parents are from Northern Ireland, and you know, it's sometimes about what are the drivers that will lead you to change. I'm sitting in my auntie's kitchen, and I couldn't work out why there were 8 garbage bins. Now, when I asked a little bit about this, Northern Ireland at that time in 2019 had 6 years worth of landfill left. Small nation, didn't have the luxury like we do in Australia, couldn't export its waste like we could into Asia or put it into landfill. So their drivers came from that, looking at waste in a different way. And it sort of, the penny dropped. It's not like, particularly when we talk about our biologicals, it's not about having someone in a fluoro vest turn up to take away waste. We should be thinking about people turning up in lab coats, because they're the building blocks to keep that product circulating as many times as we can. So for me, it came from being involved in really public debates where I think we were missing the mark, and that's not to underplay the whole role about being better stewards of our natural resources. It's just that I think we were a little bit targeting ag in particular, but not doing what Barry was talking about that informed consumer and actually educating everyone that we all have a role to play in this to be able to provide those solutions. So, you know, that's led me on a bit of a journey, and I can probably come back to policy in a moment. But the other thing is, and as Barry said, supply chains, disruption. COVID, I think, has been a really great accelerator for this. You know, the mushroom businesses that I'm involved in, anyone that needs pallets at the moment, you know, there's a shortage of pallets, shipping containers. So there are other things that are forcing this change. But for me, it started with waste, and it started with, I guess, the debates that I was involved in and thinking there's got to be a better way.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the fact too that we're using as a catalyst for change the problems that are facing us at the moment, and just relating to what you experienced with your family in Northern Ireland, you know, they had a problem. And so there was motivation to change, and I guess what you're saying now is that in this VUCA world that we live in, that the change is upon us all the time, and that can actually be used as a vehicle to drive really positive behaviours. Thanks. And Carol, from your point of view, I'd love to hear your perspective, because you've got a wonderful sociology background, and you know, so how does that tie into your personal why, and also from a professional, what's the why from a professional sense too, yeah. Carol?
Thanks, Jack. I think it's like these guys, you know, listening to Niall and Ben and Barry I can really hear the passion about what you're talking about. You know, it's not just a job for any of you. And I think it's that we latch onto something. It happened for me when I was doing some research on supermarket power in supply chains. And I was looking at the submissions to the 2008 Competition Commission inquiry that the ACCC ran. And I read pages and pages of farming submissions, because for a nerdy academic like me, that's data. So we're seeing what the farmers were saying about their interactions with the supermarkets. And I was reading a lot about the cosmetic standards and the difference between 3 or 5 millimetres on an apple that makes that item rejected and being sent off to landfill or elsewhere. Didn't make it into the supply chain. Not because it was bad or it was flawed in any way, but because it didn't meet the standard of conformity that doesn't generally work that well in natural systems anyway. So I think that triggered me into looking into food waste and responses to that and circular economy. And then I had a conversation with Food Agility and Lend-Lease. And Lend-Lease wanted somebody to look into the idea of circularity and urban agriculture on a master planned community in southeast Queensland. So we formed a team, and we have a really nice interdisciplinary team. And I think that's what you need. Complex problems need these complex solutions and different ways of thinking. And I wanted to shout out to some of my team members over there, Rudy Messner and Sam Smith. Those guys are amazing. We have a bigger team. Sam is our fantastic coder who's made a website for us, so we've developed all sorts of really fancy gizmos that are really great, and we've used that as a way in to engage with the community. I guess in terms of education, building skills, seeing what the community want to do, what they're going to do with their food waste. So we basically designed a methodology and a prototype of doing this, which involves collecting food waste, turning it into compost, growing food, eating the food, putting the waste back. So a very simple first step, circular food economy. And then we put a digital overlay on that, where we worked with e-waste social enterprise, who built some methane sensors for us out of e-waste. So old solar panels, old mobile phones. I think we had to pay $40 for an Arduino or something like that. Sam taught me this word, Arduino, everybody. And then we pushed that data into the app that Sam made for the students as well. So we had, I think for me then, the inclusion, to have the voice of those people who are not normally engaged, and to learn together on how to do circularity is what drives us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that having the inclusion across community, as you're sort of giving that opportunity for having a sense of belonging as well. We've been talking a lot over the last couple of days about that sort of concept too. So great to hear that. Carol, Barry, from your point of view, we've heard a wonderful story about your why and all of the fantastic work and the Centre of Excellence. But now that you've gone through this journey, I just wondered, has it changed over that period from when you first started to what your why is now?
No, look, it's probably strengthened more. Interestingly, the more information I receive, the more I'm certain that this is the path we need to go down. Look, what I would actually say about circularity that I really enjoy is that everybody's issue is on the table when you're talking about circularity, which I think it has not been the traditional approach in the traditional case where we've seen ourselves as competing for resource, rather than working out how we share resource and the issues that we put on the table can be everything from green issues to efficiency issues to resource use issues to customer issues, and we get to put them all on the table, whether right up to and including the service providers issues, whether it is the council and how they manage waste, or indeed it's a tourism industry and how they can attract people to the area. So my why is just more confirmed. I think I probably originally thought I need to solve a problem, and I need to solve a problem that is going to get larger. I now probably view it as, wow, this is a fantastic opportunity, and it tends to inspire anybody that you collect into the discussion, which is I think really important. So it's rare that you find people that may have divergent beliefs, that may have different objectives in life, all come together and say, I can get on board with this. I can actually help you with this. And by the way, I've got a bit of information that might help. So my why is probably extended now to go, wow, this is a great way to bring together community.
I'm not sure if I'm still, yeah. Thank you so much, Barry. And that leadership that you demonstrated as well about the wanting to create a case study that can be shared across Australia, but also, shared internationally as well, I think is a real shift in mindset from, instead of having that competitive advantage, it's about taking a cooperative, collaborative leadership approach. And I think from a business model point of view, we're going to be exploring that a little bit more. So some great questions are coming through, and I'm going to start weaving those in. So the next part, we really want to be looking at bringing up some of the more controversial parts, I guess. Let's be frank, let's be honest, this is all great in theory. We should be sharing, we should be designing out waste, designing out pollution, we should be adopting these regenerative models. But why aren't we? What are the challenges? And wearing all your different hats, we've got someone, Barry, you've got this practical example, Ben, you've got, measurement, and we've got social aspects and looking at communities, and we've also got, the context of living it and breathing it as well, Niall, but also your experience in it from a policy point of view. Let's have a frank discussion. What is holding us back? So maybe we start with you, Barry, because you've been living and breathing it. Really honestly, what are the challenges?
So I think one of the challenges. So we do need government to be on board with this, and we need them to be on board with a big way. And I'm somebody who would normally say, I can get where I need to go with or without government support. But the interesting thing for us, and I mentioned it a bit in my presentation, where the beneficiary is everybody, it is hard to fund, right? Because so where I can do circularity projects within Bega Cheese quite easily, and I can fund them myself. But where I am trying to do work that sees the beneficiary be the individual land user, the individual farmer, the individual who, we can create the environment for them to be able to access the new opportunities in natural capital, whether that being carbon sequestration or biodiversity or whatever else. And we are looking to create that opportunity for others. And of course, people of goodwill will help you get so far, but after a while, you do need, when it is for the collective good, the role of government is to actually support the collective good. So we need government on board to actually support that collective good. And that's not just around dollars, that's also around the appropriate sort of legislative tools, if you like, to make sure that these things can be enacted in a consistent way. So look, it is fair to say that we are pushing through an open door. So the door is open, but I think sometimes the discussion is one of yes, that's a really good idea, but then there's a nervousness about commitment, and so I think so that's one of the challenges which we would back ourselves to overcome, but I think the community engagement is not a challenge. So the community engagement has been fantastic. I think the customer engagement is there, but as we look to create tools that make a genuine difference for everybody, just not for a few, we need government to play a role in that.
Okay, so just to recap on, I think, a couple of really key themes there. I was hearing that, well, who takes the lead, and how do you fund that? So if it's for who pays for it, so if there's one person leading it, who pays for it there? And I think that's a really, I can personally share some stories later. I'm facilitating today, but I've definitely got some stories around that. And then, what is the role of government here? And, so there's definitely community engagement, but who is taking that collaborative leadership and that's independent so that we can have that greater good? So that's a great problem to be proposing so that we can everyone start thinking about what the solutions to that could be. So off the back of that, I'm going to change it up a bit. Let's go to you, Niall, particularly love to hear it because you've got all that experience from a government and policy point of view.
Look, this is a disruption, and governments and legislation have generally struggled with disruption to traditional markets and traditional sectors. And we've seen governments have to play catch up, whether it's in the gig economy, the shared economy, and they're doing the same in the circular economy. Some of our rules around what we can recycle, for example, are quite antiquated in some EPA legislation, for example. And then when Barry comes along and says, I want to start slowing down water across the whole catchment and I want to capture more on farm, you imagine the legislators that deal in water policy, how they're going to handle that, right? So there's some real challenges when it comes to how governments and legislation are keeping up with disruption that's happening so quickly in an area like this. But then that's a beautiful segue into where we are today and yesterday to provide that, as Dave Lamb said yesterday, that peace of mind. So he spoke yesterday the peace of mind to the landholder, but it's also through the lens of a regtech for a regulator or a legislator, the peace of mind that if Barry wants to slow the water down and capture more on farm, because they're measuring every drop in, every drop out, they're measuring the increase in biodiversity, they've got sensors in the ground, they've got satellites having a look at everything. It's a lot easier for a legislator or a regulator or government to be able to say, I can take that leap of faith. Yes, we can do that, because the fears that we had about these changes to the way that we've managed our natural resources and the way that we do stewardship can be overcome with the tech solutions that we can implement on the way through. So I think that's a challenge, but you can't sit around and listen to Barry for too long and not just be inspired that everything presents an opportunity in this space. And that's the opportunity for, I think, everyone here, is that through the lens of regtech or agritech or how we're measuring it through natural resources, natural capital, I think there are a lot of the solutions to allow us to keep up with the change of disruption.
Fantastic. So again, just to recap and help me out if I haven't heard this right, but is policy keeping, or policy perhaps is not keeping pace with the rate of change that we require?
Look, I mean, you know, it's a big sausage factory, you know, the way that we deal with legislation, it takes a long time. And quite often we're finding in everything in sustainability and all these markets, carbon, the industries are ahead of governments. I'm just saying that is what it is. But it's a lot easier for them to keep up if we've got some tech solutions that provide that peace of mind.
So we'll hold on the solutions. So from in the interim though, we're not quite there fast enough with the technology adoption and implementation that we need. So we've got three or four great problems now. Problems to solve, which I know with researchers in the room, that's what they thrive on. So Carol, from your point of view, love to hear it, particularly from community and that human aspect.
Yeah, I think one thing I like to do as a social sciences is connect this local with the global. And one thing that we're doing, I think there's policy and government and governance at a practical local level, but there's also bigger shifting trends. And there's been a very big shifting trend globally towards neoliberalism. And I think maybe the sharper way of saying that is like a belief in markets, that markets will solve problems. But markets don't often produce public goods. In fact, I was thinking that when Barry's talking, he's talking about a market that's producing a public good. But you need the right kind of CEO or chairperson in place to lead that, and it's not common. It's not a common example. So I think also within this ideology of government not interfering and being that involved, it's really hard to see how government can take the reins and lead some of this, and not in terms of complete top-down control, but even in their coordination function or a leadership function. But at the same time, if I just step back into this idea of neoliberalism and marketisation, that we're dealing a lot more with economies than we're dealing with the idea of society these days. I think there's been a tangible shift in that as well. And with that comes really rampant consumerism. And I think that's part of our problem with circularity and what do we do, is that there's also an idea of we don't need to be constantly seeking economic growth. We can look at degrowth economics. You know, how many pairs of shoes do we really need? Do we need to keep buying all of this stuff? And we can't blame ourselves as individuals. We can be conscious of that and take some responsibility, but there is a big marketing machine behind this that's constantly telling us you're not good enough unless you have the right gear, haircut, spa treatment, makeup. So that's constant, and we get thousands of those messages every day. So I think when we're thinking about what do we do as individuals and what do we do personally, we are pushing back against a kind of prevailing system that's not on board with that completely.
Thanks very much, Carol. As a former marketeer, you've touched on some of my sore points, so which is one of my whys as to why I feel really passionate about circularity, because when you're a really good marketeer, you're pushing volume, you know, and your goals, and you're motivated by doing that. And I certainly have years and years of making up to do as a marketeer, because I have pushed lots of packaged consumer goods, lots of plastics that were not recyclable or renewable, and so I've got the next half of my career to undo all of that, or to fix up that. But I think it's a really good example of...
That's good, because it's that consciousness of thinking, how do we do this? And even, I'm just thinking of what Sue Green said last night about the Indigenous woman that was talking about connecting to country, about just taking that time, just thinking, get back in your head and your heart a little bit more, and be more conscious and try and get off that treadmill of consumption. Exactly, and I love the idea too that there is a sense of responsibility at the micro and the individual level, as well as at an industry level. And when there's that misstep of misalignment of goals between what a business goals are, which might be, you know, profit and which shouldn't be dismissed, but how can we do the setting profit goals as well as circularity goals, and being able to have different metrics in place to align the goals that are more in sync. But thanks for bringing that.
bringing the consumer into the room as well. Fantastic. So Ben, from your point of view.
Sorry, my apologies. I actually have another commitment at 10:30, so I'm going to have to excuse myself from the panel. I'm very sorry. I've just run into the next my next commitment. So thank you, everybody. And Niall and Ben are very well positioned to understand what we're talking about in Bega.
Barry, before you go though, is there a question that we should have asked you?
No. Look, I'm sure if there's any questions that people have got, Niall and Ben understand the system well, and I'll be delighted to take the opportunity to chat to you on this. Sorry, I have to rush off to another commitment.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
So Ben, the challenges.
I think Barry just worked out the questions were going to get harder, so he pulled the ripcord and left it to us. Thanks, Barry. Whether you're in government, to the point Niall was making about how critical it is that policy moves at the pace industry wants to move at, or whether you're in industry, I think at the core, the big challenge around accelerating the transition to circularity is access to the data that helps you make those decisions. It might feel right, and as Carol was saying, Sue Grant so eloquently put it that until you have soil health, you can't have gut health. So that feels right, but we're all running organisations that need to make a profit and feed people. So data to inform our decisions, or data to inform policy, is one of the big challenges in circularity. And if you just think for a moment about technology and how organisations work, how manufacturing businesses work, we have come about through the linear model of you take an input and you process it into a finished good, and then you put it through a distribution system and send it out through to market through retail channels. So we take things, we mould them into something else, little bits and pieces fall off that on the way through, and then we send it out. Very rarely do we think about getting that back. So our technology platforms, our ERP systems, our manufacturing systems, our transport and distribution systems are designed for one way, not circular. So one of the massive challenges the world faces, given we are only 9% circular, right? So we've got 91% progress to make. And I might just say Australia is not even average. So we've got a lot more work to do, as we need to really think about how do we measure circularity at a business level in your own organisation. And to Barry's point with the Bega Valley, how do we do that at a complex level, and not just a community level, but a regional level where you bring in environment and social factors into that as well. So those are really gnarly research and technology opportunities, and we can play a really, I think, leading role in the world. We're starting late, but there's no reason we can't run fast and truly be a lighthouse to the world. So I'm excited about the challenge.
Great. Well, we've just done a really good wrap up there with all of the challenges for us to solve. So we've got from leadership to bringing the consumer in, the government policy, how to measure it. So let's get into the exciting part. We've got some great questions here, which is really about, well, let's start thinking about how do we solve it? So the sunny, positive side of this discussion. So we've actually got a very popular question that's come through from Emily Jones is, well, how do you propose that businesses in their early stages of growth achieve circularity as they are also navigating capacity, competition, and economic viability? So, wish Barry was here. Who would like to, maybe we start with you, we'll go in reverse, Ben. So just to reframe it, how do we propose that businesses in their early stages achieve circularity?
Yeah, I think it should be in everyone's strategy. It's as simple as just stopping and understanding what resources are passing through your business and where are you getting them from, and how do I make them go round the economy one more time or two more times, right? So everyone can do that. That is not hard. So that's a classic sort of starting point. And I would I remind all our clients that the reason this is such a positive conversation to have is that the output is a better bottom line and a better outcome for the environment. So, that just sort of takes off the table why not to do it. And then the process really does start with, really granularly looking at where do you get an item from, what's its source, is it a renewable item, is it a virgin item, how many times can I loop this through my business? There are some really useful tools then to actually run an analysis or a diagnostic through your operations. We do a lot of work with the circular transition indicator framework, and an output of that, it measures where you are, but it also signals for you where the opportunities for improvement are as well.
What about the role of digitisation and the role of technology through that diagnostic as well?
Yeah. Well, it comes back to the comment I made about the ERP systems. They're not engineered to help you visualise where that waste sits. So if you sit down with the wonderful team at Bega and ask them to really unpack, where are the materials that could be repurposed, that's quite a long conversation because there's lots of different ways and sort of pockets of the business that need to contribute to that. We need to make that simpler. Just like it's simple for us to work out the financial metrics, we need to make it simple to work out the resource and material metrics as well. So that's where technology can play a key role, being able to visualise material flows through an organisation, and that's where the research community comes into it as well. And there's some terrific project work going on with Charles Sturt University, looking at how do we not only visualise the waste in a business, but how does the research community then plug into that and try and find and discover solutions to repurpose, refurbish that item into something of a higher value and take it back around the loop. So we've all got a role to play.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'd love to hear from Carol your point of view on it, a similar twist to that same question. Where do we practically start? So, but thinking about it from the point of view, who is in the circle? How does it, from a social science point of view, how do we get that collaboration actually happening? Because it's not it's a team sport.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think that's interesting from a business perspective. Looking at your supply chain, but your supply chain could be distant and global. I think while you're looking at your supply chain and inputs and outputs, also looking at your geography, and we've done seen a great example of that with Bega cheese. And I know this model as industrial ecology. It came out of Denmark in about it must have been the 80s or 90s. And it's where the the output of one industry becomes an input of another. So I think there's probably more to explore outside of the regular business thinking of supply chains. In terms of who is in the circle, I think it's one thing we need to look at maybe to move this ahead a little bit is the co-benefits. And if you can take other people along with you and bring benefits to them as well, and think of the social. So think about who doesn't have a voice in these kinds of discussions and try and get their voice engaged. And I also think, this is the controversial part, but the voiceless, who's the voiceless? Not just humans, maybe, low socioeconomic people who, don't come to these kind of conventions, but also the environment, animal welfare issues, like taking a more ecological approach to this, I think as well would be quite interesting. So it takes a bit of a shift in thinking maybe.
Yeah, great.
But we're starting, hey?
Definitely. Thanks. And I love the point about, the circle and who's in it and how we engage people within our circle. So Niall, from your point of view, practical steps, with that slightly different lens.
Yeah, I think what's old is new, and what I love about the way that even last night has flowed into today, and Barry touched on it, is if you just stay within your business and think that it's just about looking at your business or your sector, you miss the point, I think. You miss the opportunities that circularity offers. It would be a challenge for a business based here in Bowman to go and knock on every other business's door and ask them about their materials flows. We've got to get back to that idea of community to be able to then embrace circularity. And that's, you know, if we listen to what we saw on the panel last night and what Stan spoke about, and it's the theme here. Yes, we've got to start within our business, but, you know, we quite often fall into the trap. You know, we do it on we've done it for a long time in biodiversity, for example. We just look at our farm rather than we look at the valley or the catchment. You know, it's got to be all interconnected, and I think that's probably one of the secrets why if I'm going to back anything in as to an initiative that I think that will work in Australia, it's what's happening in Bega. Because Bega Cheese didn't just think about Bega Cheese. They started there, they engaged the experts, they've done the materials flows, they're using the data, but they realised they needed the community and everyone else to be part of it. The community, the consumers, the social aspect, the environment. This is a true triple bottom line, and we bang on in Australia about the triple bottom line, but because we just try to do it within the boundaries of our business or our property. And this is where that going back to what our ancestors in this country have done for tens of thousands of years. They come together, they gather, they share, they trade, they travel collectively. And I think that's what the opportunities are. That's how I'd be starting. I'd start with my business, but you can't stop there. You have to look out and see where the connections are in your supply chains or ones you haven't thought about.
Okay, so it sounds like you're talking about, it's a real leadership role, isn't it? So who, you know, do you think it is always like the bigger cheese? Is it always an industry, a larger player who plays that leadership role, or do we think there's someone else should play that role?
Again, I think it's got to be whatever works for wherever you are. You know, Bega is being led by a large corporate. I mean, New South Wales government had set up New South Wales Circular, fantastic initiative through the Chief Scientist's office, looking at how they bring task force together, consumer task force, finance task force. Everyone has to play a role in this. Sometimes it's going to be led by the banks. Sometimes it'll be led by the consumers. Sometimes it'll be led by the local employer. I guess the answer to that, and I'm no longer a politician, so I don't want to sound like a politician, but it's going to be different in every aspect. Leadership has so many different forms. Sometimes it's community-led. Sometimes it will be an individual. Sometimes it will be government. It doesn't matter, because I think in circularity, everyone can play a part. And that's the key. Everyone can see themselves in this system, in this community, in this philosophy. And it's about that major mind shift that we need to do. This is one of the biggest disruptions that we should all embrace, because we can all see ourselves in it, we can all play a role.
Yeah, okay. One thing we haven't touched on yet are the different business models around circularity. So things such as subscription models or a product as a service. And I just thought we've got a couple of really popular questions that have just come up, and they're sort of similar. But I thought when we answer it, perhaps we could think about the business models of circularity and how we answer that, so it's all part of that sharing of knowledge. So the first one's from Ed Leffy, and it says a large proportion of the waste stream is at the consumption level. So how do we integrate that? So I guess that's about bringing community and the consumers into it. Are there some business models that could be shared? So maybe we go back to you, Ben, and this is a quick one here.
Yeah, look, there are, and it's obviously the relevant model for the relevant item, but one that sort of comes to mind for me is clothing, right? The retail clothing sector has a big role to play in becoming more circular. It's one of our big challenges globally, the textile sector. So you can buy an item and wear it and leave it in your wardrobe or throw it out. That typically is what happens, and for children that is really bad because they grow out of them before they wear out of them. But increasingly there's more models where you don't buy the item, you lease the item. So imagine not owning a pair of jeans but leasing a pair of jeans. And returning them back through. So you're the asset that's just turned them into the worn look, and then they go back around to the economy again at a higher price because I was lucky enough to wear them out for you. So there are those kind of models, and then there are as a service or platform models that's really, really prevalent in circularity. And one I like to just remind people about is washing machines. We've probably all bought them, they're in our laundry, but why did we buy them? Imagine if we instead had a per cycle charge where the washing machine was owned by the washing machine manufacturer, and we just paid a differential on whether we did a hot wash full or a cold wash half, and consequently we're changing the psyche of the consumer to use less resources. But we have a system in place then that can take that machine back, refurbish it, and keep it going back around through the loop.
Yeah, love it.
So there are different models for different products.
Love it. So perhaps if we apply that to our agri-tech, innovations in the future, perhaps we don't need to be buying them. We could be sharing them and, designing for future-proofing them. So some completely different ways of approaching it there. So we're on our last minute. So just parting comment from you, Niall.
I've just thought of a perfect business idea. I'm going to have an Akubra subscription service for politicians that I'll wear them in, and then they just lease them out so they don't turn up with a brand new Akubra and look really stupid. So there's a circular economy business right there. Done. Thanks, Ben.
Carol?
I don't know if I can top that. I would challenge the idea that consumers are to blame. I think the business models are very, very wasteful, and I think if there's power in a supply chain like we see with the supermarkets, you can reject tons and tons of good quality food at the distribution centre. But the supermarkets have the power and the narrative, so they can say it's a consumer problem, not a supermarket problem.
Oh, I love that.
Look at that.
Love that. And we're on time. So thank you panelists, and thank you audience for sharing through Slido and for engaging, and please continue the conversations.